the time for member statements has concluded. Questions without notice. Are there any questions? I give the call to the honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. At Labor's 2022 election campaign launch, the Prime Minister promised, and I quote, that Labor has real, lasting plans for cheaper mortgages, end quote. Yesterday, the Prime Minister denied making this statement. Can the Prime Minister just provide a straight answer? Did he make this statement, yes or no?
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition is not off to a good start. I'll give the call to the Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, the whole premise of the Leader of the Opposition's question is wrong, but I'm happy to talk to about the
Leader of the Opposition has asked his question. Order. The Leader of the Opposition, the Prime Minister is within 13 seconds of his answer. You've asked your question. I asked the House to be silent. I'd ask the same courtesy to be shown to ministers when they are answering questions, and I call the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. He's very angry, Mr Speaker. I'm asked about the 2022 campaign launch in Perth of the Australian Labor Party. And let me say, Mr Speaker, that there wasn't a lot of anger there. What there was enormous support. The first time for a very long time, if ever, certainly in the modern era, that a major political party chose to launch their election campaign in Perth. And I can think of at least 4 reasons why that was successful, Mr Speaker. At least 4. At least 4 reasons why, when I look across there at the member for Swan and the member for Pearce and the member for Tangney and the member for Hasluck, I'm reminded of how successful that campaign launch was, Mr Speaker. The former government, of course, had Prime Ministers who couldn't find Perth.
The member for Bowman.
Couldn't find Perth over their 9 years in office. But what we did as one of the centrepieces of our budget, our launch there, was, of course, the Help to Buy scheme. And the Help to Buy scheme, based upon successful schemes that have operated in Perth, what they enable them to do. I'm asked about the housing policy.
Order.
I'm asked about the 2022 campaign.
Order. There is far too much noise. I'm going to ask the Prime Minister to pause for a moment. I'm trying to hear the Prime Minister, but there is continual interjecting on my left. It makes it very difficult. I'm looking at you, the Leader of the Nationals. And I call the Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. On relevance, the Prime Minister was asked, did he make a statement about promising cheaper mortgages, yes or no? We just want a straight answer.
The Prime Minister is answering the question. Order. The question was about plans announced at the 2022 campaign launch regarding interest rates and mortgages, and I'm going to give the Prime Minister the call. Order.
Mr Speaker, he's so angry, and it's just after 2 o'clock.
The Prime Minister can continue with his answer.
It'll get worse.
Order.
You got an hour
Members
and 10
on my
minutes.
left will cease interjecting. The Leader of the Opposition. It's a funny way to help, but can I give the call to the Prime Minister? And I'm asking the House for order. We're into the first question. I don't want to issue a general warning, but I'm calling the Prime Minister to continue his answer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker.
The Leader of the Opposition has asked his question. He may not. I'm going to ask the Leader of the Opposition to withdraw that remark, to assist the House.
I withdraw, Mr Speaker.
You may resume your seat. You may resume your seat. For the benefit of all members, if the Speaker asks you to withdraw, you withdraw immediately without any other comment. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker.
Order. The member for Herbert and the member for Fadden. I'll give the call to the Prime Minister.
They're not happy, Mr Speaker, and it's only Wednesday. It's only Wednesday. Mr Speaker, at the 2022 campaign launch, we had as one of the centrepieces of that launch our Help to Buy scheme. That was based upon the very successful scheme that's been implemented for many years in Western Australia. There are also schemes being looked at in New South Wales by the Liberal government, and in Victoria, of course, are being implemented as well. This is a good policy, and it was in the budget, our Help to Buy scheme.
Give a call to the member for Patterson.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Home Affairs and Cyber Security. What action is the Albanese Labor government taking to protect Australians in the wake of the Medibank data being leaked?
Give a call to the Minister for Home Affairs and Minister for Cyber Security.
I thank the member for Patterson. The Parliament would be aware that last night data that was exfiltrated during the Medibank attack was released on the dark web. Based on the information that we have at this moment, the number of citizens whose medical information may have been compromised is small at this stage. But I want the Australian people to understand that that is likely to change, and we are going through a difficult period now that may last for weeks, possibly months, not days and hours. I cannot articulate the disgust I have for the scumbags who are at the heart of this criminal act. People are entitled to keep their health information private. Even amongst ransomware attackers, the idea of releasing personal medical information of other people is considered beyond the pale. So make no mistake about it, this is not just any ordinary group of scummy criminals, this is the lowest of the low. I want Australians to know that your government stands with you. The Prime Minister said this morning that he is a Medibank customer. Like millions of other Australians, I am too. The Australian government has been preparing for the eventuality that is taking place now for a number of weeks. We've been doing this through the National Coordination Mechanism, which the Minister for Health and I both attended this morning. The actions of the National Coordination Mechanism to prepare for what is taking place are extensive. It includes placing protective security around government data. It includes state police working with affected individuals. It includes the organisation of mental health support and counselling. It includes putting in place management plans around people who have some very specific vulnerabilities. And I want to acknowledge the outstanding work that has taken place already from the Australian Federal Police and the Australian Signals Directorate. They are the best in the world at what they do, and the Australian government thanks you from the bottom of our hearts for your efforts in helping protect us. The E-Safety Commissioner has been included in the National Coordination Mechanism because social media companies and indeed traditional media companies are going to be crucial in our national response to this problem. And I say now, I know I do not need to point out the importance of social media companies not allowing this information to be published and not allowing it to be shared on your platforms, and to traditional media companies to not publish the private information of Australians. If you do so, you will be aiding and abetting the scumbags who are at the heart of these criminal acts, and I know that you would not do that to your own country and your own citizens. Speaker, the Australian government is stepping up and addressing this problem. I've said before that we are about 5 years behind where we should be with regard to cyber security, and there is a power of work underway at the moment to change that.
Order.
We are working hard to protect you and to protect our country. Thank you.
Give the call to the member for Hume.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. An average family is $2,000 worse off under this budget, with their mortgage going up by more than $1,000 since May. When can this family expect the government to deliver on its promise of cheaper mortgages?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Well, Mr Speaker, it's about time. 2 weeks and 1 day since the budget was handed down, and the Shadow Treasurer has now asked his second question about anything to do with the budget. I welcome the question. I welcome his interest, even if it's belated and typically incompetent and misunderstood. Mr Speaker, of all of the people in this place who are qualified to ask questions about the cost of living, the Shadow Treasurer would be in about 150th place, 151st place, or whatever we're up to now, because he is more responsible than anyone else in this place for the fact that energy prices are going up.
That's right.
There are two people in the world most responsible for what we're seeing in electricity prices. One of them sits in the Kremlin and the other one sits over there, Mr Speaker. Because what we saw from—
Order. The House will come to order. I'm calling the member for Hume. The member for Hume. I'll give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, Mr Speaker, on relevance, you have allowed ministers a preamble, but you've drawn them back to the question. The question was very tight. It was about mortgages, and the Minister, the Treasurer, needs to respond to the question.
I'm going to ask the Treasurer to return to the question, given that he is now 1 minute in.
Speaker, and I am responding, of course, to the question about the cost of living, and I'll come to mortgages in a minute.
Order.
So when it comes to the cost of living, obviously energy prices are a big part of that. One of the reasons why we've got higher energy prices than we'd like is because we had a decade of energy policy chaos, and the person most responsible for that is the Shadow Treasurer. So that's the energy part of the cost of living challenge. Now, when it comes to mortgages, those opposite are either
Manager of Opposition
dishonest
and
or they fail to
Hume.
understand two basic facts. First of all, when it comes to the quotes that they are using about the Prime Minister's launch in Perth, we were referring then, and we're proud to have a policy for smaller mortgages and cheaper repayments with our Help to Buy policy. Something that the well, that's what it's about. And well, that's what it's about, Mr Speaker. It's about smaller mortgages and smaller repayments. That's what the policy's about. And what really cracks me up, Mr Speaker, about the question from the Shadow Treasurer is that the New South Wales Liberal government had just legislated a very similar scheme for the very same reason, that this government seeks to implement a similar policy. So that's the first fact that either the Shadow Treasurer doesn't understand or he's not being honest about. The second one is that interest rates started going up on their watch, Mr Speaker. And they started going up in May of 2022, and it was very clear then, just as it's clear now, that the interest rates that people are battling to pay started going up on their watch. So if you put it all together, Mr Speaker, when it comes to the cost of living, before the government changed hands, interest rates were rising, real wages were going backwards, inflation was going up, and a big part of the reason for that was the electricity price chaos and the energy market chaos that the Shadow Treasurer should come to the dispatch box and take responsibility for.
Order. I give the call to the member for Reid.
My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How is the Albanese Labor government renewing Australia's international engagement on climate change, and how has been the response?
I give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for her question and thank her for her leadership on climate issues. And I've very much enjoyed working with her on things like community battery for her electorate and other things. But, Mr Speaker, the honourable member knows we are acting domestically, we're acting in our region, and we're acting internationally to restore our nation's reputation as well. And in this government we understand that better climate policy is better foreign policy and is better economic policy as well. It's in our national interest. It's in our region, where our brothers and sisters in the Pacific are at the front line of the climate change crisis. They know how much is at stake, and we know how much is at stake as well. For some small island development states, Mr Speaker, climate-related natural disasters have already cost them 200% of the size of their economy. That's the sort of thing which is at stake here, and including in our broader region as a country that neighbours the world's largest archipelago, Indonesia, which has so much at stake. And I've very much enjoyed the working relationship I've developed with my counterpart, Tarifa Nasrif, as chair of the G20 Energy Ministers in recent months. And of course, Mr Speaker, better international engagement is also important for our ambition for Australia to be a renewable energy powerhouse. Our ambition to export renewable energy around the world, creating jobs and investment as we do so. And of course, this is a key fortnight for international engagement with the COP convening in Egypt. And when Parliament rises, I'll be departing for Egypt with my Assistant Minister, Senator McAllister, representing Australia for the negotiations next week. And I know that Australia will receive a warm welcome there, Mr Speaker. I know that because that warm welcome has been expressed over the last 24 hours. The outgoing president of the COP, the Right Honourable Alok Sharma, said this overnight. He said, "How can I put this diplomatically? The government of Australia is back at the front line in the fight against climate change, and I want us to share all that right now." And I note the comment of the former Vice President of the United States, Al Gore, who said earlier this year the people of Australia chose to start leading the renewable energy revolution. They can mock. They like to mock, but Mr Speaker, the fact of the matter is Australia is back at the international table because we know that good climate policy is good economic policy. We know that good climate policy creates jobs in our regions and investments in our regions who have powered Australia for so long. We understand what is at stake. We are the developed country with the most to lose from unchecked climate change, Mr Speaker. Natural disasters, floods, fires and cyclones, all this is at stake. The people who have suffered from floods over recent months can expect them to get worse and more frequent.
Member for Bowman,
Same with bushfires, Mr Speaker. We are also the developed country with the most to gain from real action on climate change. That's what the Albanese government will deliver.
I'll give the call to the member for North Sydney.
Thank you. My question is for the Minister for the Environment and Water. Australia's largest plastic bag recycling program has collapsed, and this comes after a series of failures in the industry, including stockpiling, dumping, toxic fires, poor regulation, high costs and the closure of international markets. Households are doing the responsible thing, recycling their plastics, but industry and the government are letting them down. Can the minister please outline the specific steps she will take to ensure the recycling industry delivers for Australians and our environment?
Give the call to the Minister for the Environment and Water.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for North Sydney for her question. I know that she and her constituents are passionately committed to increasing recycling rates, as we all are. It was very bad news yesterday when we heard that REDcycle, which was established in around 2011, has actually closed its doors. REDcycle has collected about 5.4 billion pieces of soft plastic in the time that it's been operating. And of course, if it hadn't collected that soft plastic, it would have ended up in landfill. We know that families are very keen to do their bit for recycling. I'm sure most of us do this, collect our soft plastics, take it back down to the supermarket next time we're going to the supermarket, see it go into the REDcycle bin, and we know that when that plastic is collected by REDcycle, actually it's quite a valuable commodity. It goes into making Coles supermarket trolleys, it goes into footpaths, garden edging, a whole range of very useful products. I was very disappointed, as the member for North Sydney was, to hear that REDcycle has closed its doors, and I have spoken to Coles and Woolworths today, the Food and Grocery Council, to see what we'll do in the immediate future period and then longer term. Immediately, we see absolutely tonnes of soft plastics that have been stockpiled. We have to deal with that stockpile first. And longer term, we have to invest in the infrastructure that will recycle this plastic. This government is already playing a role with environment ministers around the country. We've upped our ambition. We've given $1 million to the Australian Food and Grocery Council to work with industry to develop more sustainable use for these plastics. We've set aside $60 million for hard-to-recycle plastics specifically. We're working across Australia to phase out single-use plastics, bags, plates, cups, stirrers, cutlery, plastic cutlery. Sadly, I hear those opposite interjecting. They set a target of 70% of plastics to be recycled or compostable by 2025. Guess what they achieved? 16%, stuck there for 4 years, no improvement. So you can stop with the interjecting. It'd be better if you'd done your job when you had the chance. Better if you'd done your job when you had the chance. I'll tell you this. Families are committed to action. This government is committed to action. It's important that industry also does its share.
Before I call the member for Bruce, I'd like to inform the House that present in the gallery today are a group of advocates and sufferers of silicosis. On behalf of the House, I offer a very warm welcome to you all and welcome to question time. And I give the call to the member for Bruce.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Government Services. Minister, we are halfway through the second week of public hearings of the Royal Commission into Robodebt. What have we learnt about who was responsible for the unlawful Robodebt scheme?
Give the call to the order. The Minister for Climate Change and Energy will cease interjecting. The Minister for Government Services will resume. Order. Members on my right. I'll hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, Mr Speaker, this conduct by the government on this matter risks bringing the Royal Commission into disrepute. The Royal Commission has been established to make findings of fact that is clear from its terms of reference, and we are now seeing a series of questions which presume to do the Royal Commission's job for it. This is quite inappropriate, and these questions ought not to be allowed.
That's the point. The point of order is the question was out of order. Yeah, just clarifying what your point was. And order, members on my right. I'll hear from the Leader of the House.
To the point of order, I wasn't sure if he was going to raise it based on standing orders or a conflict of interest. It has been the practice for a long time in this chamber that when a Royal Commission is on that has been commissioned by the government of the day, that matters of evidence will be discussed in this place. And the member opposite has a very short memory if he thinks this is new.
I'll call the manager.
Well, on the point of order, Mr Speaker, it is for the Royal Commission to make findings of fact based upon the evidence put to it. It is not for this House to do that, and we are, with the approach the government is taking, where they are trespassing across ground that they ought not to be on.
Thank you. This matter was raised in the House on Monday. Practice does indicate that matters before a Royal Commission, the House can treat with some flexibility to allow variations in the subject matter. Practice has also indicated over the years that matters before the Royal Commission can be discussed during question time. The question time is in order, and I just refer the manager to pages 521 to 525 of Practice. And I give the call to the Minister for Government Services.
In just under 2 weeks of hearings in the Royal Commission into Robodebt, we've learnt several facts. One, that the previous government received departmental and external legal advice that the Robodebt was unlawful from its start. We've also learned that top-tier law firm Clayton Utz provided legal advice to the former government that the scheme was not able to be justified, prompting internal emails noting that this particular draft view was catastrophic. We've also learned that the former Director of Payments Integrity at the Department of Social Services and his team saw the income averaging and what became Robodebt as unethical from the beginning, and that the initial legal advice warning that this was unlawful was black and white, and that should have been the end of the proposal. But as to who was responsible for the unlawful Robodebt scheme, I draw the attention of the House to a speech concerning the demarcation between ministerial responsibility in the public service given by the former Prime Minister on the 19th of August 2019 at the Institute of Public Administration, outlining his key 6 guideposts underpinning the approach in government. The then Prime Minister, Mr Morrison, said responsibility for setting policy, for making those calls and decisions, lies with the elected representatives of the people. He continued, at the end of the day, our ministers, I and my colleagues, have got to look constituents in the eye, face the public, look them in the eye and be responsible for these decisions. He then shared that memorable farmyard anecdote that when I played rugby, my coach used to describe this difference as the bacon and eggs principle. The chicken's involved, but the pig is absolutely committed to the task. He further explained his analogy. That is why under our system of government it must be ministers who set the policy direction. He added, it is important not only to establish clear lines of accountability, it's fundamental for our democracy to keep faith with the Australian people. Now, we do not yet know if or when the member for Cook or the other former ministers
responsible for the unlawful operation robo-debt scheme,
Member for Bruce.
those ones sitting opposite, we don't know if they're going to be called to give evidence to the Royal Commission, but we do know this. Applying the former Prime Minister's principles, the leader of the former government, they cannot simply pass the buck onto the public service for their almost 5-year illegal, unlawful shakedown of hundreds of thousands of Australia's most vulnerable citizens. I table the former Prime Minister's speech about ministerial responsibility for government policy. Thanks.
I give the call to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Families will be forced to pay more this Christmas for their snacks like kettle chips, cheesels and CCs because energy costs for manufacturer Snack Brands Australia, based in your electorate, Minister, have tripled from $3 million to $9 million. Why are families being forced to pay for this Prime Minister's broken promises to cut power prices?
I give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I thank the Deputy Leader of the Opposition for her question. I'm very aware of the issue with Snack Brands, which is in my electorate, and I am aware that they were a customer of Weston, which went broke in May. And I'm aware that they were then covered by the roller event and then were transferred to another provider and have since made further arrangements. And I'm aware of the gas prices they are being charged at the moment. So I am fully aware of those issues. I'm also aware of the issue that they're having at their proposed Orchard Hills facility on the border of the electorate of Lindsay and my electorate, which the AER is being involved in as well. And I'm also aware of the gas prices that industry is having to pay across the board. And that's why we are making it clear that we will act on gas prices, Mr Speaker, because as the representative,
on my left,
as the representative in this House of the biggest industrial estate in the Southern Hemisphere, I know about the impact of these issues, Mr Speaker. That's why the Prime Minister, the Treasurer, the Industry Minister, the Resources Minister and I have made it crystal clear that we're not going to do what the previous government did and pretend it wasn't happening and change the law to hide price rises. What we will do is be straight with the Australian people and act.
I'd also like order. The Minister for Resources and the member for Groom will cease interjecting. I'd also like to advise in the House we have Joanna Gash, the former member for Gilmore, in the gallery. A very warm welcome to Jo Gash. And I give the call to the member for Newcastle.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And my question is to the Prime Minister. The Albanese government has fulfilled its election commitment to establish a Royal Commission into robo-debt. How many people were hit with unlawful debt notices as part of the scheme? And what toll did robo-debt have on Australians?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Newcastle for her question and for her very strong advocacy, including on this issue. You do measure a society by how it treats the most vulnerable, and robo-debt was a cruel failure of this fundamental test. It caused trauma and fear in the name of the Australian government. 443,000 people were falsely accused of owing the government money. Australians hounded and harassed over debts that didn't exist. At the height of the scheme, the member for Aston, who was Human Services Minister, said this, and I quote, "We'll find you, we'll track you down, and you will have to repay those debts and you may end up in prison." What we know is that at the very time, the government knew that it was illegal and unlawful in black and white. And I think about people like Tony, who lived in my electorate at the time. Tony had cancer twice in 2 years. The second time he received support from Centrelink while he went through chemotherapy, once his sick leave ran out. Because that was for a period of time, he's an honest man, but he was dealing with these life-changing health issues. He was in his 20s. He made a full recovery and he went back to work as soon as he could, because that's the kind of fellow that he is. But 5 or 6 years later, he started getting these aggressive letters accusing him of owing nearly $5,000. Now, for Tony, it wasn't just the stress of finding the money. He'd done it so tough. It was the suggestion that he had lied, that he had taken money as if he hadn't been sick, when he had been undertaking chemotherapy and had gone through the trauma that having cancer in your 20s will bring. That's what happens when you take the humans out of human services, which is what those opposite did. Human services stripped of humanity, social services without social conscience. We are, through the Robo-Debt Royal Commission, trying to get to the bottom to make sure that it can never happen again. We do need to have answers to this. The Robo-Debt Royal Commission is playing a critical role in exposing the events that led to such trauma for hundreds of thousands of Australians, and we owe it to them, including those who aren't around anymore, to get to the bottom of these facts.
The call to the Leader of the Nationals.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How many private properties will be impacted from the construction of 28,000 kilometres in new poles and wires as a result of the government's energy policy?
Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, Mr Speaker, it would be better if the Leader of the National Party based his questions on facts. On facts. Well, the premise of his question is incorrect, because there is no government policy of 28,000 kilometres. You might want to check his facts. He's referring, as I've indicated to the House before, IEMO's Integrated Systems Plan. He's referring to the green hydrogen superpower scenario. The government's seeking to implement the step change scenario, and what we're doing as we do so is very significantly improving community engagement and consultation. There's money in the budget to do so, because under the previous government this did not occur, and the communities that are represented by the members for Ballarat and Hawke are paying the price for that indolence as we speak.
I give the call to the member for Bean.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Government Services. Canberra student Maddie received an $8,000 debt notice in 2018. She was overwhelmed by the debt and was in despair, feeling that she was in trouble from the government. Why is the Royal Commission into Robo-Debt important to young Australians like Maddie? Who are the ministers responsible for the operation of the Robo-Debt scheme in 2018?
Call to the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme and the Minister for Government Services.
Thank you, the opposition. Thank you, the member Bean, for your question. Young Australians bore a disproportionate share.
Order.
Young Australians bore a disproportionate share of the unlawful Robo-Debt scheme. Almost half, or about 195,000, of the victims of the Robo-Debt scheme were aged under 30. In fact, 79,000 were 24 or under. Some were just kids aged 17. Now, one of these victims was Maddie. She's a great kid. She was studying international studies in 2018. 2018, as it happens, was the same year that both the members for Bradfield and the members for Wannon served as the Ministers for Social Security. Now, Maddie's never met either of these gentlemen, but their paths, unfortunately for her, did cross, because the government in 2018 raised an unlawful debt, $8,000 for an alleged overpayment of youth allowance against Maddie. But Maddie never owed the money. Still, she was traumatised. I spoke to her today. She said that she was scared. Her hopes for a career in the law were in jeopardy. As I said, I spoke to Maddie today. She has previously said that I was so overwhelmed by the debt and the thought that I was in trouble from the government, I attempted suicide. She continues, I'm very grateful to have survived, but I know that other victims of Robo-Debt were not as lucky. Maddie spent 4 months in hospital. She told me that She wants the former government and all governments to understand that you need to get things right before you do them, because the consequences for people's lives are real. Maddie speaks for all young victims of robo-debt. Maddie, you shouldn't have to survive your government. Australians deserve and need to know why an Australian government continued to run an unlawful scheme that raised hundreds of thousands of unlawful debts against innocent Australians when they must have known it was illegal. The opposition members down the other end, they taunt during question time that we're not going to find what they think we're looking for. Colleagues in this House, we already know it was unlawful, it was cruel, it was stupid, it was negligent, it was wrong, it was just mean. But what we don't know is why did the ministers who were then the ministers keep doing it for 4.5 years? No smirks excuse the responsibility of not doing your job properly to Maddie and hundreds of thousands of young Australians.
Give the call to the member for Riverina.
Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians, and I refer to the Prime Minister's answer yesterday regarding the National Anti-Corruption Commission. If the Prime Minister's answer yesterday was right, why are Indigenous rangers covered by the proposed commission but not union officials exercising a power under a law of the Commonwealth?
Give the call to the Minister for Indigenous Australians.
On the 21st of May, just gone, there was an election. There was an election that the Labor Party won because of the issue of integrity. That was one of the main issues that people were voting on in terms of that election. Indigenous rangers are a fundamental part of caring for country. We have a commitment on this side of the House to double the number of Indigenous rangers and to also increase Aboriginal protected areas by 10. That is the commitment on this side of the House. Not to mention justice reinvestment, not to mention the enormous amount of money we're putting into Central Australia to deal with issues that are very difficult. The point that you raise about the rangers
Minister
not being covered.
Pause. The minister is being directly relevant to the question, so I will hear from. Well, the minister was talking directly about the issue that the member raised, but there's no point of order. I'll give the call back to the Minister for Indigenous Australians.
And I have to say that Indigenous rangers are absolutely accountable to their community because they come from the community that they serve. They deal with issues to do with feral animals. They deal with issues of keeping water holes clean. They deal with issues of looking after country and water.
The minister will pause. I'll give the call to the member for Riverina.
And I fully respect what Indigenous rangers do for and on behalf of the nation, but the question also related to why are they covered by the proposed commission but not union officials, and she hasn't referred to that part of the question yet, Mr Speaker.
The minister is referencing the question with the issue of Indigenous rangers. She can answer the question how she sees fit, and I will give her the call and ask all ministers to remain relevant to all parts of questions.
I've completed my answer, thank you.
Give a call to the member for Canberra.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Social Services. Expectant mother Julie from Curtin was living in a domestic violence refuge and working 3 jobs when her robo-debt notice arrived in 2015. What action is the Albanese Labor government taking to provide certainty to Australians like Julie who've been forced to live with false debts hanging over their head because of the former government's robo-debt policy?
Give the call to the Minister for Social Services.
Thank you, Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for Canberra for her question. The member for Canberra has been a vocal advocate for her constituents that have been impacted by the Robodebt fiasco. Robodebt was a failed policy that caused suffering to some of the most marginalised people in our community. I'd remind the House that because of this disastrous scheme by the Liberal National Party, around 400,000 Australians had unlawful debts raised against them. It is a massive failure in public policy and was driven by ideology and stigmatising welfare recipients. As far back as 2016, there were members of the public flagging concerns that these debts just weren't right, but successive former ministers of the Liberal National Party, the member for Cook, the member for Aston, the member for Wannon, the member for Bradfield, to name a few, just didn't listen. Individuals felt increasingly anxious, depressed and worried because these debts kept coming and they couldn't understand them. Now, some of these harms affected people significantly, and as the member for Canberra mentioned, expectant mother Julie from Curtin was living in a domestic violence refuge and working 3 jobs when her Robodebt notice arrived. She reported this work to Centrelink, as she was required to do, but was caught up in the Robodebt web when she was told she owed $14,000 to pay back. Now, because of the damaging way Robodebt averaged our income, this debt was grossly overestimated. The debt was just wrong, but her payments were automatically reduced without warning, and the money she expected did not appear in her account. This left her in an incredibly precarious position. It meant there were times when Julie couldn't afford food or bills for her daughter. She recounts regularly experiencing the humiliation for having to leave groceries at the checkout after her card was declined due to the unexpected insufficient funds. This was such a difficult circumstance and just one example of the significant human cost of the Liberal Party's flawed and illegal Robodebt scheme. But our government is taking action. Not only have we established the Royal Commission that is now underway, but we're taking action to provide certainty to those who have a Robodebt review still open, still hanging over their heads. Around 197,000 reviews were commenced under the Robodebt scheme, but never completed. These in-flight reviews were put on hold when the Morrison government cancelled Robodebt, but they've been sitting there, causing a lot of people anxiety and stress. Well, this government is taking action. These reviews have now been closed. Enough is enough. It is time to draw a line in the sand.
Put the call to the member for Kennedy.
Defence Minister, in a national survey, 60% of respondents said if we're invaded, they wouldn't fight. In Europe, war drums are beating. In China, Pelosi's visit triggers mobilisation. Minister, did we have in our last war confrontasi 1.5 million combat rifles, and now we have only 36,000 rifles? Was $4 billion spent on hundreds of drones and dozens of patrol boats, which, except for a small machine gun, have no armaments whatsoever? My Calcadoon mob held British invasion at bay for 60 years. Minister, can I give you their telephone number?
I give the call to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And
Order.
Can I say to the honourable member, yes, you can definitely give me their telephone number. I think that would be very useful. Can I thank the honourable member for his question, and in doing so, can I thank him, dare I say it, in his earlier years for his service in the CMF, and perhaps in the same breath can I thank the service of all of those in this House and in this Parliament in the Defence Forces, and indeed can I thank the service of the thousands of Australians who have volunteered for our regular Defence Force and our reserves. As the honourable member's question alludes, we live in a very precarious world. Through most of my lifetime, a tenet of strategic thought has been that if anybody meant to do us harm, we would be given a 10-year warning. And in 2020, the former government rightly, in its Defence Strategic Update, observed for the first time that we now live within that 10-year threat window. We are seeing the global rules-based order being placed under increasing pressure in Eastern Europe, in the war in Ukraine, with the appalling invasion by Russia of that country, but we're also seeing the global rules-based order being placed under pressure in the Indo-Pacific. And so the question is begged as to what we are going to do about that, and that is the work of the Defence Strategic Review, which is being undertaken right now. And I don't want to preempt what will be concluded there, but clearly we are going to need to think in strategic terms in the future, much more in terms of impactful projection, being able to hold our adversaries at risk at far greater distances from our shores, both in terms of greater lethality, as the member has alluded to, but also through the full spectrum of proportionate response. And exactly how we do that will be the work of the Defence Strategic Review, but clearly a capable long-range submarine is going to be really central to that, which is why we are working with our allies in the United Kingdom and the United States on developing for Australia the capability of having a nuclear-powered submarine. But inherent in your question also, I think, is another really important point, and while I wouldn't agree with all the assertions in your question, there is, I think, occasioned by this the need for a different discussion with the Australian people about the risks that we face. And this is not to be done in a way which causes panic or which is alarmist, because actually I'm optimistic about our ability to keep Australia safe, our agency in being able to maintain our way of life, but having a sensible, sober, clear conversation with the Australian people about the world that we face is really important, and that's what the Albanese government is seeking to do.
Give the call to the member for Wills.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Attorney-General. Cathy, who lives in Coburg, is a scientist who was on Centrelink entitlements for 3 months in 2012 while working as a casual at university. Cathy received a robo-debt notice in 2017 and has spoken of her unconscionable experience. Why is the Royal Commission into robo-debt important for working Australians like Cathy?
I give the call to the Attorney-General. Deputy Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting.
I thank the member for Wills for his question. I am truly saddened to hear Cathy's story. All of us in this place have heard many stories like Cathy's. Many of our constituents all over Australia have told us about their own unconscionable experience of robo-debt. The truth is that the former Liberal government's robo-debt scheme was not only wrong and unethical, but also against the law. The member for Wills asked me why the Robo-Debt Royal Commission is important for working Australians like his constituent Cathy. The Robo-Debt Royal Commission was a key election commitment which we wasted no time in putting in place. It's important that the events which led to this cruel scheme are fully exposed with the powers that only a Royal Commission has, so that those responsible are held to account, and even more importantly, so that we can make sure that this never happens again. In just the first weeks of hearings, it's been uncovered that the Department of Social Services first became aware that robo-debt was potentially unlawful in 2014. But once it found favour with the former Prime Minister, the member for Cook, it was full steam ahead. In 2016, and we've already heard this from the Prime Minister—
I'll just ask the Attorney-General to resume his seat, and I'll hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, Mr Speaker, practice is very clear on this. It says that one of the circumstances in which the Sub Judice Convention should be applied is, quotes, where the proceedings are concerned with issues of fact or findings relating to the propriety of the actions of specific persons. Now, that is precisely what the terms of reference of the Royal Commission go to. The letters patent authorise the Commissioner to inquire into the following matters: the establishment, design and implementation of the robo-debt scheme, including who was responsible for its design, development and establishment. So the Royal Commission has been charged with finding facts, and it is particularly surprising that the Attorney-General should be trampling all over the distinction that should properly be drawn, and it leads to the obvious conclusion that this exercise is nothing but a politicised witch hunt. The interest in finding the truth is a convenient
You may resume
figure.
your seat. And I would just caution the manager for using language regarding the Royal Commission, and I will call the Leader of the House.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. To the point of order, there's a reason why the Manager of Opposition Business turned up with just one page from practice rather than the whole book, because had he gone on to read, he would have had the reference to the question as to whether the proceedings before a Royal Commission are sub judice is therefore treated with some flexibility to allow for variations in the subject matter, the varying degree of national interest and the degree to which proceedings might or might not be or appear to be prejudiced. It would be extraordinary to argue that simply presenting to the Parliament what has already been given as evidence before the Royal Commission could in any way prejudice it. In any way. We are simply dealing with evidence that is already before it.
On the point of order, the member for Latrobe will cease interjecting. The member for Latrobe will cease interjecting. I'm trying to rule on the Manager of Opposition Business point of order. I've listened carefully to both points. The Attorney-General is going through proceedings so far. I'm listening carefully to his answer and will be mindful of the matters raised, but so far he is in order. The question is in order, and I give him the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. The Prime Minister has already quoted the comments of the member for Aston, former Minister for Human Services, from 2016, but I'm going to repeat them because they were so shameful. This is what the member for Aston said: "We'll find you, we'll track you down, and you will have to repay those debts and you may end up in prison." Now, those comments were made after the government knew that the scheme was unlawful. It is shameful. Our government believes in the rule of law. The former government took a cowboy approach to the legality of their actions, even on something as far-reaching as robo-debt, which ended up affecting around 400,000 Australians. How could this happen? Who was responsible? What advice did they seek? What advice were they given? And most importantly, how can we make sure that this never happens again? A Royal Commission will answer these questions, and I have every confidence that this Royal Commission will.
I'll give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, at a national address on April 5 here in Canberra, you promised Australian households and businesses you would cut their power bills by $275 a year. Prime Minister, have you apologised to Australians for your broken promise, one you have refused to repeat since the election?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for his question and for his ongoing interest in my speeches. I thank him very much, because he referred to a speech prior to the election, I believe. He has a great deal of interest in what happened to energy prices prior to the election. Well, on the 21st of May 2022, which will be a date familiar to those opposite, a day when the Australian people rejected the coalition, the gas prices were $34.75 a gigajoule. $34.75 a gigajoule. Now, during the previous term, prior to the 2019 election, they committed to, on the 15th of September as well, for example, they said the former government released its much-vaunted plan for a gas-fired recovery. Remember that? Remember that? A plan that would reset the East Coast gas market and deliver lower prices. Lower prices. So that was the 15th of September 2020. They said that they were going to have lower prices. Now, on the 21st of May, The price
Order.
of
Members
gas
on my left.
was $34.75. So they were going
Member
to
for Groom,
decrease prices.
Member for Hume will cease interjecting.
So how much do you think prices were when they made that commitment? They surely must have been substantially higher than $34.75 because they were going to reduce prices, lower prices.
The Prime Minister will order. The Prime Minister will pause. The Prime Minister will just pause for a moment, and I will hear from the Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
Well, Mr Speaker, on relevance, in question time previously you've directed a minister to be relevant to the question. Where the minister has strayed and begun talking about the record of the former government, that's what we've seen for the Prime Minister. He needs to come back to the question about his promise to reduce power prices by $275.
The question was about power prices and the Prime Minister's commitments, and I'm bringing him back to the question and ask him to continue.
Mr Speaker, and it is absolutely relevant what was happening to the prices of gas prior to the election, because indeed on the 15th of September 2020 gas prices weren't higher than $34.75. They were $4.20 per gigajoule. So they were $4.20 per gigajoule. They said it would result in lower prices, and on election day it was $34.75 per gigajoule.
Order. Members on my left.
That was after their so-called gas-fired recovery, which would reset lower prices.
Groom,
it's no wonder that the only person who has ever said, "Great job, Angus, well done, Angus," is the Shadow Treasurer who was responsible for this debacle.
Order. Prime Minister's time has concluded. I give the call to the member for Cunningham.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Treasurer. How does the budget help address Australia's affordable housing shortage?
I'll give the call to the Treasurer.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and thanks to the member for Cunningham for her interest in affordable housing. And we are proud on this side of the House that the budget was able to include important policies on housing, like the Housing Australia Future Fund, like the Help to Buy scheme, which we've been talking about already in question time, and the regional first home buyers guarantee as well. But the new part in the budget on Tuesday night a couple of weeks ago was the new housing accord. And what the housing accord does is it recognises that there is a shortage of affordable rental properties in this country, and that we give ourselves the best chance to deal with this challenge if we bring people together to try and solve it. And so what the housing accord does is it brings the Commonwealth together with the state and territory governments, with the industry bodies, with the super funds, with local government and with other institutional investors as well. And it recognises that when you've got low vacancy rates and high rents, there is a responsibility on government to do something about it. And that's where the target comes from those discussions, and that's where the policy comes from. And it's been very well received in the housing sector, Mr Speaker, and I pay tribute to the work of the Housing Minister and other colleagues who've worked so hard to make this housing accord a reality. The Housing Industry Association said, and I quote, "Labor's first budget shows leadership to tackle Australia's housing supply and affordability challenges for all Australians." The master builders say, "We thank the federal government for taking the first step in bringing all parties together to start tackling this crisis." Community Housing Industry Association, "A breakthrough moment for Australia's housing affordability crisis. This initiative is a huge stride forward." The Property Council said, "We commend the government for making housing supply and affordability a centrepiece of this budget and for striking an agreement with the states and territories." So, Mr Speaker, I thank the industry bodies for the overwhelmingly positive reaction to our housing accord and to the housing policies in our budget. And in particular, Mr Speaker, I thank all of the parties to the accord as it's drafted. We've got all of the states and territories signed up from both sides of the political fence. We've got Australian Super, Australian Retirement Trust, HESTA, Aware, CBUS, Industry Super Australia, UniSuper, Rest Super, Colonial First State, Insignia, Telstra Super, BlackRock, IFM Investors, the Master Builders Associations, the Housing Industry Association and the Property Council of Australia as well. People are coming from everywhere to be part of this housing accord because it gives us the best opportunity to deal with an issue in the housing market where it's too difficult for people to live near where the jobs and opportunities are being created. The difference between this side of the House and that side of the House is that we care enough about it to bring people together and do something about it.
I give order. Give the call to the member for Clark.
Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs. Minister, the ALP won the election promising to abolish TPVs, Safe Haven Enterprise visas and the failed fast-track process. But we've still heard nothing about how or when this will happen, despite 31,000 refugees being in limbo and unable to reunite with family, to access stable work and education or to travel abroad. So, Minister, when will the government end the cruelty and provide permanent protection so that refugees can rebuild their lives in Australia?
Give the call to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs.
Thanks, Speaker, and I thank the member for Clark for his question and for the sincere concern which lies behind it, indeed his long-standing advocacy on behalf of refugees and asylum seekers. I acknowledge that he and many members of the crossbench have raised these issues with me in respect of this very significant commitment. Now, Mr Speaker, I'm very proud to be a member of a government that recognises that we can be resolute in maintaining strong and secure borders whilst not abandoning our humanity. That is fundamentally important. It is who we are as a people, regardless of what members opposite might say and regardless of their record of cruelty and neglect. Regardless of their record of cruelty and neglect. I'm also proud to be a member of a government that keeps its promises, unlike members opposite. And this government made a commitment, as the member for Clark recognises, to transition people who came here more than a decade ago and who are owed our protection and who are on temporary protection visas or shares to permanent visas. That is a commitment we made. It's a commitment I am working towards realising together with my friend, the Minister for Home Affairs. We are doing so in the manner in which this government is conducting itself, consultatively and deliberately, making sure we get this right. And we will get this right, taking the time to get it right. And I welcome any further discussions with the member for Clark, members of the crossbench or members opposite on how we will meet this important commitment.
Give the call to the member for Swan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. What consultation with the business community has the Minister and his department engaged in as part of the development of the Secure Jobs Better Pay legislation?
Give the call to the Minister for Employment, Workplace Relations and the Minister for the Arts.
Thanks very much, Speaker. I want to thank two West Australians. I want to thank the member for Swan, and I want to thank Senator Cash, because Senator Cash, in an interview on Sky News with Kieran Gilbert, was asked specifically about consultation with business, and she set this test for the government. If the government were listening, they would have consulted with the job creators in this country before they introduced the legislation. So that was the test. So I thought, well, let's just go back through and work out what consultation was done with business prior to the introduction of the bill. Because Senator Cash said, some of those opposite in debate have said absolutely nothing. And I guess it's a bit like the old thing with the Romans. Absolutely nothing except for the consultation with the BCA, with ACCI, with AI Group, with COSBOA, with Clubs Australia, with the MBA, with the NFF, with ARIA, with the ACAPMA, with the Manufacturing Installation Association, with individual employers such as Qantas, DP World, Team Global Express, formerly known as Toll Group. Including with that, with alliances such as Migrant Women in Business, the Harmony Alliance, Migrant and Refugee Women for Change, the National Rural Women's Coalition, Women for Disabilities Australia and the YWCA Canberra. Then, as well, before introduction, we had the Committee on Industrial Legislation, including the Business Council of Australia, the Housing Industry Association, the National Farmers Federation, the Master Builders Association, the Pharmacy Guild of Australia, the Australian Industry Group, Australian Business Lawyers, the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. I will acknowledge Steve Knott from AMA was not there at that meeting, but he was invited and didn't turn up. We then had the consultation which has occurred since introduction of the bill, which I've spoken about publicly before, including with the BCA, with the AI Group, with COSBOA and with ACCI and with individual employers, again including Woolworths. We then have the process that continues with the Senate inquiry, which those opposite have been critical of the Senate inquiry process, which is more thorough than what happened for the Fair Work Amendment supporting Australia's Jobs and Economic Recovery Bill in 2021. More thorough, in fact, than any legislation, and I've got the list here. Their Respect at Work Bill, their Registered Organisations Ensuring Integrity, their Proper Use of Worker Benefits Bill, their Casual Conversion Bill, their Pay Protection, their 4 yearly reviews and other measures, their Corrupting Benefits Bill. The list goes on. It is the most consultative process that has happened for a decade. And those opposite simply have to acknowledge every criticism they have, what they did was less. So except for all the consultation that happened before introduction, all the consultation that's happened since introduction and all the consultation that will continue, apart from all that, absolutely nothing.
Cease interjecting. Give the call to the member for Menzies.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Iranian Australians are pleading with us to follow the lead of the United Kingdom, Canada and the EU and impose sanctions against a regime which has violated the rights of Iranian women. Beyond words of support and condemnation, what action does the government intend to take?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Menzies for his question. And I have, as well as the Foreign Minister, expressed my abhorrence at the actions of the Iranian regime in clamping down on the rights of women, in particular to wear whatever they want, after the tragic killing of Mahsa Amini. What we've seen is a clampdown on women in particular in Iran. And as a result of that, I know that much of the diaspora here, like the diaspora around the world, has expressed their abhorrence at this action. The Labor government will continue to work with our allies, including in multilateral forums such as the United Nations. I expect that this may well be a topic that's also raised at the meetings that I'll be attending of global leaders over the coming week. But I thank the member for his question. I acknowledge the enormous hurt that Iranian people, but Iranian women in particular, are feeling at this very difficult time. Watching this clampdown on human rights in Iran for things that we in this country take for granted. And I thank the member for his question, and I will certainly ensure that we liaise with him about further action that the government is considering. We actually don't have a vast number of economic relations between Australia and Iran. And one of the things that we have done is make sure, and I'm sure that the Leader of the National Party would understand why we have done this, is make sure that any action that's taken, that we're fully cognisant of the implications for Australian businesses of that. But we'll continue to speak out, we'll continue to vote in any forums in which Australia has a presence to ensure that the people of Iran, who are showing great courage in standing up for their human rights, know that Australia, as always, and in a bipartisan way, Australia is friends of all those who stand up for their individual rights, and in this case, in particular, the rights of women.
On indulgence, I call the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I want to join the coalition with the comments of the Prime Minister, and I want to recognise the work of the member for Menzies and other members in this House as well who have met with members of the community here, and the outpouring of emotion is absolutely understandable. The scenes and the reporting is horrific, and the treatment of women is completely unacceptable. And as the member for Menzies has pointed out and had a number of discussions on this issue, and I know there is heartfelt sentiment across the aisle in relation to this issue, the coalition will support any actions the government takes, even if it means an economic consequence for our country. There are markets otherwise that we can identify, and we will work with the government to support you in decisions, because a very clear, significant, tangible message needs to be sent that this type of behaviour is abhorrent, unacceptable in any society and completely against the values of our country.
Give the call to the member for Lyons.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Communications. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to boost mobile coverage and broadband for regional communities and expand connectivity on farms?
Give the call to the Minister for Communications.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. The government understands the vital role that communications plays for those living, working in and visiting regional and rural Australia. That's why we took to the election our Better Connectivity Plan for regional and rural Australia, as well as a plan for a better NBN. Our October budget backs this by delivering on our election commitments, with $2.2 billion for regional connectivity. That's a boost of over $800 million compared to the March budget of the previous government. Our plan provides $656 million for further rounds of the Mobile Black Spot program, improving communications resilience, which we know is so important given the recent and recurring natural disasters, the regional connectivity program and an independent national mobile coverage audit. Two other initiatives relevant to the member's question are $6 million to extend and enhance the Regional Tech Hub, which provides free expert advice on improving connectivity literacy, and $30 million to expand on-farm connectivity. Mr Speaker, connectivity literacy is vital because it informs decisions about what solutions can best extend connectivity from one part of a farm to the other. And this month is the Regional Tech Hub's Connectivity Month, and I was delighted to launch this important initiative last week with the National Farmers Federation at the sheep farm of Jen and Jack in Gunning in New South Wales. Jen is actually the manager of the Regional Tech Hub, and she described what a game-changer connectivity is. Like many farms, they have mobile coverage at the farmhouse, but it doesn't reach the shearing shed and all corners of their property. The knowledge of and the capacity to deploy technology to extend and make use of that better coverage can make a real difference. Importantly, Mr Speaker, we know that investment in farming connectivity solutions can realise significant productivity gains. It has been estimated that as much as a $20 billion increase in the gross value of agricultural production could be achieved by the uptake of advanced farming technologies. Improving connectivity will enable agricultural businesses to use digital technologies that increase productivity and efficiency and, importantly, improve safety. And that's what the delivery of our election commitments for the Regional Tech Hub and improving on-farm connectivity are all about. Mr Speaker, this government is committed to growing the economy and supporting regional communities by investing in such productivity-enhancing digital infrastructure, and we have delivered substantially increased funding in our budget for this very purpose. This is in addition to the expansion of full fibre access for a further 1.5 million Australian homes and businesses to the NBN, and importantly, 660,000 of these upgrades in regional and rural Australia.
Call to the member for Berowra.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question's to the Prime Minister, and I refer to the Prime Minister's answer in question time yesterday. If union officials exercising powers under a law of the Commonwealth are not covered by the National Anti-Corruption Commission because they're covered by other integrity bodies, the Fair Work Ombudsman and Fair Work Commission, why are these bodies not included in the list of 22 Commonwealth integrity agencies in section 15 of the bill?
I give the call to the Prime Minister.
Union officials, if they act corruptly in engagement with government agencies, are treated like any other third party and are covered.
Give a call to the member for McEwen. Order. I'll just ask the member for McEwen to resume his seat, to make sure everyone can hear his question, to make sure the microphones are on. Order. Give the call to the member for McEwen.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Skills and Training. How is the Albanese Labor government working with states and territories to help tackle the skills shortage crisis the government inherited?
Give the call to the Minister for Skills and Training.
Thank you, Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for McEwen for his question. As a tradie, he knows how important it is to deliver the skills to the economy. He worked on the tools before he came to this place. He understands how important it is to deliver the skills to businesses and to make sure that workers in this country have the skills that are in demand. Speaker, it's true to say the only way we will genuinely deal with some of these really strong challenges we have with respect to acute labour shortages is working in partnership with industry, employers and unions, but also in terms of the delivery of the vet sector, delivering through TAFE and other training providers. We need to make sure we're working closely with states and territories, and that's why we started by, of course, agreeing upon 180,000 fee-free TAFE and vet places for 2023. That was an announcement, the first announcement at the Jobs and Skills Summit after the Prime Minister met with premiers and chief ministers and signed that deal. That was a critical part of delivering the training that our labour market, our economy, our businesses need. But we need to continue to do more. We know wherever you look across the labour market, across the economy, we have skill shortages. The traditional trades, occupations, professions, the aged care, it doesn't matter where you look, we have to deal with those issues. That's why my colleagues, the Minister for Home Affairs and Immigration, they're both working on restoring the skilled migration pathways. That's why we're looking to make sure we provide access to people who've been locked out of the labour market, and that's why we need to continue to invest in skills and training in this country by delivering a vet sector that's fit for purpose. Now, it's true to say there was to be a national skills agreement that went for 5 years that should have commenced 1st of July this year, but those opposite failed to reach agreement with states and territory governments. In fact, they didn't reach agreement with one of the 8 other governments that was put to them. You would have thought when you've got a few $1 billion to possibly provide to state and territory governments, you'd be able to get one signature out of 8 on a piece of paper. But no, not one state or territory government supported the Commonwealth before the election in setting up the National Skills Agreement. But we will make sure that we will work closely with those governments and deliver a National Skills Agreement starting from the 1st of January 2024. We'll make sure that we reform the vet sector so it's fit for purpose, delivering the skills that our labour market needs, delivering the workers that are needed for businesses, in fact skills that businesses are crying out for. We will deliver that because whether you listen to the Treasurer today on the housing policy or the Minister for Workplace Relations in relation to industrial relations, or in this area, we work collaboratively, we work together with industry, state and territory government and others.
I give the call to the member for Braddon.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. On the 12th of April this year, the Prime Minister promised Tasmanian families that his government would, quote, reduce household prices by $275, unquote. Will the Prime Minister finally admit to Tasmanian families that he has broken his word to them and his only remaining promise on power bills is the 56% increase in electricity prices which appears in the budget?
Order. I'll give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for his question, which goes to Tasmania. I'm going to quote someone who said the issue here that New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland and South Australia are dealing with now, apparently he left off Tassie, has been the ideological war when it comes to climate change and energy policy in this country, and that has led to a lack of private sector investment. That was from that well-known socialist Dominic Perrottet, the New South Wales Liberal Premier. I must say that
the Deputy Leader of the Opposition
of all the Prime Ministers who Premier Perrottet has dealt with, I'm his favourite. I'm his favourite. He tells you that. He tells you that. But you don't have to just look at the public sector across the spectrum. You can look at comments of the 8th of November. Kevin Gallagher, Chief Executive of Santos. This is what he had to say on the 8th of November. There are conversations of fear that I never expected to see in my lifetime, and in Australia they are the consequence of more than a decade of energy policy failure. that, quite frankly, I have been warning about for many years. The chief executive of Santos. And then he said
Leader of the Nationals.
they're also the consequence of domestic climate wars. The head of Santos,
The
Kerry
Leader
Schott,
of the Nationals is
the person
warned.
handpicked to be head of energy security by those opposite. Just have a think about the way electricity gets dispatched. They get dispatched on the basis of who's the cheapest, and the cheapest is wind and solar. They have fuel costs that are zero, so their marginal cost is effectively zero. But I'm asked also about Tasmania, and I suggest to the honourable member that he give Jeremy a call. Jeremy, just up the road there, Jeremy Rockcliffe. He might be in your seat, I think he represents, in your seat. So you share a seat. And this is what the Tasmanian Premier and the member for Braddon had to say. He said this: renewable energy is absolutely 100% in Tasmania's DNA. Reliable, affordable and clean energy that will unlock billions of dollars of investment over the course
Members
of the
on my
next
left will
decade.
cease interjecting.
This is one of the most exciting
Member for
announcements
Herbert.
for decades when it comes to Commonwealth and state government investing together in future energy security, unlocking that energy for attracting investment right here in Tasmania. I say to this member for Braddon, listen to the other member for Braddon who stood at a press conference.
Order.
This is a Liberal Premier.
The Prime Minister's
That's what he had
time
to say.
has concluded. The Assistant Minister for Foreign Affairs can cease interjecting as well. I give the call to the member for Corangamite.
Thank you. Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Earlier today you attended the launch of the new website, The Field. How will this resource support Australians living with a disability?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Corangamite for her question. And earlier today, myself, Minister Shorten and Minister Rishworth were honoured to attend the launch of The Field with the Australian of the Year, Dylan Alcott. Dylan Alcott is a remarkable Australian, and we should all be proud, as he is, of the achievement that he has done as an advocate of people with disabilities. What The Field is about is matching up people with disabilities, showing the skills that they have to offer the employment market with employers, and making sure that there's a one-stop shop so that we can encourage the more than 500,000 Australians with a disability who want to work. What Dylan Alcott said today at the event here in Parliament House was that not everyone can work, but those who do want to work should be given the support to do so. And they should be done so in a way that helps not just them to contribute fully to society, but also one that will help our economy. Now, at a time of skills shortages with relatively low unemployment, there's no better time for employers to log on and participate in this process, just as people with disabilities are doing so. Connecting people with career opportunities, as The Field does, is good for the individual, but it's also very good for business. And one of the things about the Jobs and Skills Summit that struck me was that some of the most powerful moments were of people with disabilities speaking about their experience in the labour market and how, by being given an opportunity to contribute, they were lifting up their own self-status, they were lifting up their income, but they were also helping businesses to grow. And there are a range of sites. There's a very powerful video that I encourage people to have a look at as well, of a person with a disability, a young woman working in hospitality in a remarkable way. Dylan Alcott spoke powerfully at the Jobs and Skills Summit, but he also, I think, brought a great deal of grace and honour to this House this Parliament House when he attended here today. I do encourage employers to participate. I congratulate Dylan Alcott for his ongoing leadership, and it was a great privilege to be there today, and I can think of no better note to finish question time on today than to wish him and all those who participate in the field well, and I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
Move to the MPI.